NASCAR is striking back against the teams when it comes to the whole charter deal between 2311, Front Row, and themselves. And there is plenty to look at for both next year and maybe further on beyond that. Bob Pockrass tweeted out a bit more of the detail last night when it came to all this, saying, quote, "In its filing response to 2311 and FRM, hopes for expediting discovery, NASCAR states, quote, NASCAR has taken steps consistent with its contractual obligations to the other charter teams to plan for a season with only 32 charters. NASCAR is working on reallocating funds that plaintiffs would have received to increase prize money and other special awards for the 2025 season for the benefit of the teams that timely executed the 2025 charters, as well as open teams who can compete to win the increased prize money." NASCAR opens this filing with, quote, "Plaintiffs have filed a meritless suit against NASCAR, alleging baseless antitrust claims in order to obtain commercial agreements they previously rejected and to attempt to extort more favorable contract terms." Well, I'm just going to say that last part, isn't that just negotiating? I don't necessarily think it's extorting, all things considered, but we'll just roll with that. And Bob did say at different points that the status at the moment of the two SHR charters that are up in the air that Front Row and 2311 would have bought is still, well, up in the air. So to me, I have a few different ways of looking at this. To start with, I think NASCAR, in their eyes, is calling the bluff of 2311 and Front Row, telling them, yeah, we're not going to blink and we're going to come at you just as hard as you guys are coming at us. And they also kind of with this claim that the teams will be able to run off of being an open car without a charter, which is something that we know isn't true because teams, even with charters, are running in the red. But there are a couple of effects that this is going to have, I think, and I do think that this is a huge escalation, even if it doesn't end up getting to this point. The fact that this is now on the table is something that I think, all in all, is unprecedented in the modern era of NASCAR. When you look since the modernization efforts, there has been nothing close to this. For 2025, it's going to be interesting. For instance, I think the duels are going to be wild. Bubba Wallace, Noah Gragson, Todd Gilliland, and Tyler Reddick at the minimum all could be open drivers next year. And we saw this past year in 2024, the duels are very competitive nowadays. This isn't like the duels at the end of the Gen 6 era where Derek Cope is just puttering around out there. You're going to have some very good cars, and you're going to have some very good drivers in those cars, and you're going to have well over 40 entries. I wouldn't be surprised if, again, we have 42 to maybe 45 entries for the Daytona 500, meaning 2 to 5 drivers could be heading home. And we saw guys like BJ McLeod run well. We saw Jimmy Johnson on the fritz. There is really no guaranteed spot without a charter. And what would the headlines be if somebody who really has more mainstream appeal like Bubba Wallace and a Michael Jordan car missed out on the race? I actually think it would add a bit more drama and intrigue to it personally. Not saying I side with NASCAR on this, but that's just another aspect to look at. A ton of intrigue for the biggest race could help in the short term, and NASCAR probably will push that with the networks. But when you also look kind of at the money terms of this and the bigger terms, well, then I think it gets a little more murky. 32 chartered teams will, no matter what, be running. And I think that those 32 chartered teams will win no matter what. And what do I mean by that? Well, first off, they're set to get more money next year. And with that, of course, it's going to help the bottom line. Obviously, more money does that. But with that, it's going to help them, I think, also get a bit more of an edge in spending over these two teams that are holding out if this ends up going through the entire year. And they'd reap the benefits that 2311 and Front Row just couldn't get. Also, you'd have 4 possibly major competitors removed from the competition possibly for the playoffs. Yeah, Bubba Wallace might be sort of a fringe top 10 guy, but he can get a win every now and then. And any other year, but probably this year and maybe one other in the last 5 to 10, and he'd be in the playoffs this year. Tyler Reddick, the regular season champion, has been pretty darn good. And then you look at the front row guys. People will probably scoff at the fact that I think Noah Gragson and Todd Gilliland could be real competitors, but think of it like this. Todd Gilliland and Noah Gragson are now running for a Tier 1 Ford team, a front row team that is amazing at super speedways, has been getting faster and faster over the last couple years, and really could be a playoff contender now. You have now lightened out field if these teams elect not to show up to certain races. And that's the thing, I'm not really surprised with all of this. I don't think in any way this is really surprising anymore, other than the fact that the headline just reads really crazy as a longtime NASCAR fan. NASCAR is going to fight this to the bitter end, no matter how bad optically it looks for them. And make no mistake, I don't care if you side with the teams or NASCAR, this optically looks terrible for them. And it's looked terrible for them for the majority of the year. This will get taken as far as NASCAR is willing to go with it. If NASCAR wants to fight all the way to the top, they'll take it all the way to the top. If they're wanting to try and bury the teams, they will pour all the money in the world they can into it. And they will also, doing so, run the risk of major change and major revelations about how their business practices are. NASCAR, in my opinion, is playing a very, very dangerous game. And if the teams end up getting any advantage, they could pay the price dearly for it for how they run business. But how, outside of maybe the dual talk, will fans see this all play out? Well, again, if this all goes through, because it's not set in stone just yet, I predict that Front Row and 2311 will skip the Clash and All-Star races for sure. There's a non-points race aspect to it. There's no reason championship-wise to even go towards it. And with the Clash, at least, you're going to be at Bowman Gray, so maybe you do that. The All-Star race will be at North Wilkesboro, but short tracks, you can get caught up in people's messes. You can damage equipment, and that can cost money that in a non-points race, if you don't win, which is going to happen for at least 3 of them, well, you're not going to recoup those costs. So why bother showing up? On the other end of it too, if it gets really bad, I could possibly see them protesting, sitting out points races that monetarily would not benefit them either. A trip to the West Coast on the West Coast Swing probably isn't going to help them. A super speedway that isn't Daytona or Talladega, so the Atlanta races, or if the purse is down for Talladega or Daytona outside the 500, probably not worth it for them to crash up their cars, even with the money they could get if they won. So that's something that I could really see playing out. And in so, smaller and slower fields. Smaller fields because if they don't show up, we possibly at times could have 32 car cup fields, which, if I'm not mistaken, would be the smallest in many decades. And slower because many of the open teams might look at this and say, well, we do have the increased money we can look at, but that also means you're going to probably have lesser cars in the field, and you're going to have guys puttering around like that Arby's car at Bristol a couple weeks ago. All in all, this going on longer will not benefit the sport in the short term. And it's unclear if it will benefit them in the long term, especially if the teams end up losing and no change whatsoever is made. All of this would be for nothing. So there's a lot of risk, I think, on both ends, but especially the teams with it, obviously. Overall, like I said, this feels unprecedented in the modern era because, well, it is. So with that, I'm going to pass it to you. How do you see this playing out? Does NASCAR get the edge over everybody, or does the teams get some kind of advancement that maybe we didn't think possible? Let me know down in the comments below. Well, all right, leave a like on this video, share this video, and subscribe to this channel for more great and fun NASCAR content. Thank you so much to all my channel members for your continued support, and until next time, have a good one.